Whoopi Goldberg, the iconic actress and entertainer, has a home in New York City that carries more than just her personality. It might also host a friendly spirit. Over the years, Whoopi has shared lighthearted anecdotes about peculiar happenings in her house. While the stories never cross into frightening territory, they certainly add a touch of mystery to her already fascinating life. Whoopi's New York residence is a classic city home with rich history woven into its very walls. From the moment she moved in, she felt the house had a vibrant energy. While initially dismissing it as her imagination, little oddities started to catch her attention. Sometimes, I'll put something down on a table, and when I come back, it's moved, Whoopi once said during an interview. It's not scary, though. It's just curious. She affectionately refers to the presence as her housemate, describing it as playful rather than disruptive. The actress insists that this unseen presence is respectful, never causing chaos or harm. One story stands out. One morning, Whoopi was preparing for a busy day and couldn't find a set of keys she desperately needed. Frustrated, she searched every corner of the room. Moments later, when she glanced at the table she had already cleared, the keys were sitting right there in plain sight. It's like they wanted to help, Whoopi joked. She believes that the spirit, if it exists, must be connected to the house's history. The building, after all, has stood through decades of stories, changes, and lives. It wouldn't be surprising if a benevolent soul decided to linger. As someone with a deep appreciation for storytelling and the supernatural, Whoopi takes the experience in stride. I don't think they're here to haunt me. Maybe they're just keeping me company, she has quipped. For her, the idea of coexisting with a spirit is far from unnerving. It's simply another layer of her unique life. Whoopi's account reminds us that not all ghostly tales need to be scary. Sometimes they can reflect the connection between people and the places they call home. Whether it's an unexplained mystery or simply the charm of an old house, Whoopi's story adds a little magic to everyday life. Do you think Whoopi's experience is the result of a real spirit or just the quirks of an old New York home? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Whoopi Goldberg has always been known for her wit and humor, and when she speaks about the mysterious happenings in her New York City home, she keeps the tone light. But behind the playful banter, some of her experiences suggest there might be more to this friendly spirit than meets the eye. Late one night, Whoopi was working on a script in her cozy living room. The only sounds the occasional honking of New York traffic and the soft ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. As she focused, she felt a prickling sensation like someone was watching her. She glanced around, expecting to see her cat or perhaps the shadows of tree branches swaying outside the window. But nothing was there. Shrugging it off, she returned to her work. That's when the sound started. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper, coming from the hallway just outside her living room door. She paused, listening intently. The voice wasn't speaking words, but it had a rhythm, as though someone was murmuring a tune from long ago. Whoopi, unafraid but undeniably curious, called out, "Is that you, housemate?" The whispering stopped abruptly, replaced by the faint creak of footsteps retreating into the shadows of the hallway. Weeks later, another eerie moment left her questioning the nature of her ghostly housemate. One morning, as she passed by the ornate full-length mirror in her bedroom, she froze. Something wasn't right. She leaned closer, staring at her reflection, when she noticed it wasn't quite her reflection. The figure in the mirror was dressed differently, clothed in what looked like an old-fashioned white nightgown. The face was hers, but the eyes seemed older, darker, and not entirely her own. Startled, she blinked, and the image in the mirror returned to normal. "Okay, that was weird," Whoopi said later, laughing it off with friends. But deep down, she wondered if the spirit was more than just playful. The most unsettling experience came during a stormy evening. Whoopi was drifting off to sleep when she felt the unmistakable sensation of someone sitting down at the edge of her bed. Groggy, she reached out, expecting to find a pet or maybe a stray blanket bunched up near her feet. Instead, she felt cold, a chill so intense it made her hand jerk back instinctively. Turning on the bedside lamp, she scanned the room. It was empty. The bedspread, however, bore the faint impression of where someone or something had been sitting. "I just said, all right, if you're going to hang out, at least let me get some rest," Whoopi later recounted with a grin. But even as she joked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't been alone that night. Curiosity eventually got the better of her. Whoopi reached out to a local historian to learn more about her home. What she discovered only deepened the mystery. The house, it turned out, was built in the late 19th century by a family who had suffered a string of tragedies. The youngest daughter, a girl named Eleanor, was said to have passed away suddenly in the home. Rumors suggested that her spirit had lingered, unable or unwilling to leave the place she had loved so dearly. Whoopi wondered, could Eleanor be the presence she felt? Or was there something or someone else sharing her space? Whoopi Goldberg had always been a woman of reason, her sharp wit and logical mind guiding her through every obstacle in life. But the strange occurrences in her New York City home were beginning to make even the most rational part of her wonder. Was there something more to this friendly spirit than she had initially believed? One evening, Whoopi was hosting a small dinner party, surrounded by close friends and fellow actors. Laughter filled the air, the scent of her famous homemade lasagna drifting from the kitchen. But as the night wore on, something started to feel off. It began subtly flickering lights that no one paid much attention to at first. But as the evening deepened, the flickering grew more persistent, almost as if the house was reacting to the laughter itself. The dim lights seemed to pulse in rhythm with the conversation, as if the house were alive. Suddenly, the lights blinked out completely, plunging the room into darkness. The guests murmured in surprise, and Whoopi's cat, usually calm, began to hiss and retreat into the corner of the room. That's when it happened. From the corner of her eye, Whoopi saw a faint glow, a soft, eerie light emanating from the hallway. She thought it was a trick of the eyes, perhaps the reflection of streetlights from outside. But as she looked closer, the glow began to form into a shape, a figure, faint but distinct, drifting silently across the hallway. It was a woman, dressed in an old-fashioned gown, her face obscured by shadows. Whoopi's heart raced. She wasn't sure if it was her imagination or something far more terrifying. But when the figure suddenly disappeared through the wall, it became clear. This was no trick of the light. Weeks later, the incidents began escalating. One night, Whoopi was awakened by a sudden chill that swept through her room, so cold it cut through her thick blankets. She sat up, rubbing her arms in an attempt to shake the cold off, when she felt it. A hand, ice cold, gently resting on her shoulder. Her breath caught in her throat as she froze, unable to move. She turned, expecting to find a friend or perhaps her cat, but the room was empty. The touch had felt real, as though something had been standing right next to her. For the first time since moving into the house, Whoopi felt the creeping weight of fear. She had dismissed the strange events before, but now the chilling presence seemed undeniable. It wasn't just a playful spirit. It felt darker, more foreboding. It was the voice that finally pushed Whoopi to her breaking point. She was sitting in her study, writing late into the night, when she heard it, a soft, disembodied voice calling her name. "Whoopi!" She jumped in her chair, looking around the room, but no one was there. The voice wasn't loud or urgent. It was soft, almost coaxing. Came again, but this time it seemed closer. "Whoopi, come find me." Panic set in. Whoopi stood up, her hands trembling as she scanned the room, the shadows suddenly seeming much darker than before. She rushed to the window, looking out at the busy city street below. Everything was quiet. The voice, though, was not. A third time, the whisper echoed through the room. "Whoopi." It wasn't a voice she recognized. It was faint, unsettling. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was as though the house itself was calling her. Desperate for answers, Whoopi decided to bring in a medium. A friend of hers, a well-known psychic, had been talking about the house for months, intrigued by the unusual energy. She finally agreed to perform a seance in the hopes of communicating with whatever spirit had been lingering. As the medium chanted softly and the candles flickered in the dim light, the room grew colder. The air became thick, and Whoopi could feel the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. The medium reached out with trembling hands, her voice growing frantic as she began speaking to the entity in the house. "What do you want?" the medium asked. The temperature in the room dropped so rapidly that their breath became visible in the air. Whoopi stood back, watching, heart pounding. A voice, raspy and unintelligible, responded. The medium's face twisted in fear. "It's not a friendly spirit," she gasped, her voice shaking. "It's angry, it's trapped, and it doesn't want to be alone." In the weeks that followed, the strange occurrences became more frequent and intense. The house that had once felt like a vibrant home now felt like a prison. Whoopi couldn't shake the feeling of being constantly watched. Items continued to move by themselves, footsteps echoed in the hallways late at night, and that cold, icy touch would return at random, as though the spirit were trying to make contact or perhaps warn her. Whoopi finally made the decision. She put the house up for sale, unable to shake the feeling that whatever had been in that place wasn't finished with her. "Sometimes," she said in an interview shortly before the sale, "there are things in life that you just can't explain. And maybe that's okay. But I'm ready for something different. I've learned a lot from this house, but I think it's time for me to move on." Whoopi packed her belongings and left the haunted house behind, hoping the strange occurrences would stay there. But as she locked the door for the last time, she could have sworn she heard a soft whisper, carried on the wind, "Whoopi, come back. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story." Whoopi Goldberg had left the house behind, hoping that the restless spirit that had haunted her for months would finally stay in the shadows. She moved to a new, quieter apartment in the city, feeling a sense of relief that the unsettling presence seemed to have faded with the sale of the house. Yet, despite her best efforts to move on, the house's eerie grip had not loosened. It started slowly. At first, Whoopi dismissed the unsettling dreams as mere coincidence, the remnants of a stressful period. But the dreams grew more vivid, more unsettling. In one, she stood in the hallway of her old home, the one she had sold months ago. The air was thick with cold, and the whispering voice from her past seemed to echo from every corner. "Whoopi," it would say, just loud enough to send a chill through her spine. The old house was dark, the walls decaying, yet she couldn't move. Her feet were stuck to the floor, her body paralyzed as the voice drew closer. "Come back." In another dream, she found herself back in the living room, sitting on the same couch where she'd once laughed with friends. But now, the room was empty, save for the glowing figure of a woman standing by the window. The woman's eyes were dark, hollow, and unblinking. "You left me," the woman whispered. "You can't leave me." Each morning, Whoopi would wake in a cold sweat, her heart racing. She tried to shake off the feeling, to tell herself it was just the mind's way of processing the past. But the dreams came every night, relentless and haunting. A week after her move, Whoopi received a letter. The envelope was old-fashioned, the kind you would expect to find in a vintage shop ivory with a wax seal. There was no return address. The handwriting on the front was elegant but uneven, as if written by someone who had not used a pen in years. She opened it carefully, the air thick with tension. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. It read, "You didn't think you could run, did you? I am always with you, waiting for you to remember. Come back. I need you." Her pulse quickened as she looked at the letter, but she didn't recognize the handwriting. Whoopi's first thought was that it was a prank someone had found out about her experiences and decided to play a cruel joke. But when she looked at the bottom of the page, her blood ran cold. There, scrawled in the corner, was a single name, Eleanor. Days passed, and the unsettling feeling only grew stronger. One afternoon, Whoopi sat on the couch in her new apartment, flipping through some scripts. Her phone rang, and she glanced at the screen. It was an unknown number. Usually, she would ignore it, but for some reason, today felt different. "Hello," she answered, her voice tense. A soft, faint voice responded. It was unmistakable, the voice from the house. "Whoopi, I need you." The line went dead. Whoopi stared at the phone in disbelief, her heart racing. She called the number back, but there was no answer, just the sound of an eerie, static-filled tone. A few days later, after the unsettling phone call, Whoopi felt compelled to return to the old house just for a moment, to see if the strange occurrences had really ended, or if something was waiting for her. She arrived late at night, the streets of New York bathed in the quiet hum of the city's glow. The house loomed in front of her, its windows dark and empty. It looked the same as she remembered, but something felt wrong. The air was heavy, the kind of weight you feel before a storm. Whoopi stood at the front door for several moments before finally stepping inside. The door creaked as it swung open, a sound that immediately sent a shiver down her spine. The house was just as she remembered, though dust had settled in corners, and the furniture had been moved. Seemed abandoned. But there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, like old paper and lavender. The same scent that had filled the house when she first moved in. She wandered through the hallway, the silence deafening. The same whispering voice seemed to follow her, distant but there, echoing softly in her ears, "Whoopi, come back." When she reached the living room, the strange sensation of being watched overwhelmed her. She turned to see a figure standing by the window, the same glowing figure she had seen in her dream. But this time the woman was different. Her face was clearer now, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce right through Whoopi. The woman spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "You never should have left." Whoopi rushed out of the house, her heart pounding in her chest. She slammed the door behind her and ran back to her car, feeling the weight of the house's curse bearing down on her. She didn't look back as she drove away, but as she reached the end of the street, she glanced in her rearview mirror. For a split second, she thought she saw a figure standing in the window of the house, staring out at her. "Whoopi, come back." Whoopi couldn't shake the feeling that the house was never going to let her go. The eerie whispers, the uninvited presence, the chilling dreams, it had all built up to something she couldn't ignore anymore. She thought leaving New York would put an end to it, but it was clear now that the house, and the spirit haunting it, had a claim on her that couldn't be severed so easily. After that final night, Whoopi couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the woman, the pale figure with the hollow eyes. Her dreams grew darker, more vivid, until Whoopi could no longer tell where the dream ended and reality began. Finally, in desperation, she reached out to the one person she thought could help, the psychic she had consulted earlier. The medium had always spoken of an energy tied to the house, but now it seemed more urgent than ever. "I think it's time you understood," the medium said over the phone. "That house, it's not just haunted. It's cursed. There's something binding it to you." Whoopi felt a chill crawl down her spine. "What do you mean?" "Eleanor wasn't just a spirit," the medium explained. "She was a child who died in that house, but her soul never found peace. She was seeking something, something only you could give her." Whoopi listened in stunned silence as the psychic continued. "She was drawn to you because your energy, your compassion was something she needed. But she became attached to the house, to the place where she died. And when you left, she couldn't let you go. That night, unable to live with the mounting fear, Whoopi made the decision. She had to go back. She needed to confront Eleanor, to understand what it was that had kept the spirit tied to the house and to her. Whoopi arrived at the house before dawn, the world still cloaked in darkness. The building stood before her like a silent sentinel, its windows like hollow eyes watching her every move. She stepped inside, the familiar smell of old paper and lavender thick in the air. It was colder than it should have been for a summer morning. As Whoopi walked through the front door, she felt it, the same sensation that had always been there. The house was watching her. She walked through the rooms, calling out softly, "Eleanor, are you here?" The silence stretched on. Then, as she reached the living room, the air seemed to thicken, and a soft creak echoed through the hallway. The temperature dropped suddenly, and Whoopi's breath became visible in the cold. And there she was standing in the same spot by the window where Whoopi had seen her before. The pale woman, her eyes now sharp and focused on Whoopi, spoke again. "You came back." The voice was clear this time, not a whisper, but a cold, chilling command. "Why did you leave me?" Whoopi took a deep breath. "I didn't mean to leave you. I didn't understand. I'm sorry. But what do you need from me?" Eleanor's eyes softened, but her voice still held that pleading tone. I can't leave until I have what's mine. You have what I need. Whoopi's heart pounded. What is it you need, Eleanor? What is it that will let you rest? The figure stepped closer, her form growing more solid with each step, until she was standing right in front of Whoopi. Eleanor's eyes were no longer hollow. They were full of longing and pain. I need your soul, she whispered. You are the one who can set me free. Whoopi's blood ran cold. What do you mean? Eleanor's hand reached out, not with malice, but with desperation. I was trapped here because I didn't have the life I was meant to have. I need your energy to complete me, to let me move on. Whoopi stepped back, her mind racing. She remembered the psychic's words about Eleanor's attachment to her, about the connection between them. The spirit wasn't evil, it was lost, confused. A child seeking something to heal the brokenness of her death. I can't give you my soul, Whoopi said firmly, her voice trembling but resolute. But I can help you find peace. I'll help you move on. I'll do whatever it takes. The room grew still. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, and the air grew thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. Eleanor's form flickered, her expression softening as though she were seeing Whoopi for the first time. You would do that for me? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. Whoopi nodded. Yes. Let me help you. Let me help you find your peace. Eleanor stood there, her eyes softening, the tension in the air slowly easing. A light seemed to glow faintly around her, a soft, golden aura that began to envelop her. She smiled, but it was a smile full of sadness, as though she were finally letting go of something she had clung to for too long. I never wanted to hurt you, Eleanor whispered, the words trailing off as her form began to dissolve into the light. Thank you, Whoopi. And then, just like that, the figure vanished. The coldness in the room dissipated, leaving only the warmth of sunlight streaming through the windows. Whoopi stood in the middle of the living room, the house quiet for the first time in months. The weight that had hung over her for so long had lifted, and with it, the haunting presence of Eleanor. The house, now calm, felt empty, not of spirits but of fear. She left the house one last time, locking the door behind her. As she walked down the street, the city felt different, brighter, quieter, as though a shadow had been lifted from the world around her. Whoopi would never forget what happened in that house, nor the spirit that had needed her help to move on. But she knew it was time to let go, to let both the house and herself find peace. And as she walked away, she felt a quiet assurance that Eleanor had finally found hers. And so, the house stood, empty but not forgotten. A place of both darkness and healing, a chapter in Whoopi Goldberg's life she would never forget. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. The stories told in this video are based on urban legends and rumors. We do not assert their truth.